5, 4, 3. Good morning. This is the Industry and Regulators Committee of the House of Lords. We are meeting today to look at the Office for Nuclear Regulation, which is an area that we haven't looked at previously. Our witnesses this morning are Mike Finnerty, who is the Chief Executive and Chief Nuclear Inspector at the Office for Nuclear Regulation, and Dr. Nicola Crauford, who is the Chair of the Office for Nuclear Regulation. So thank you very much for coming and welcome to both of you. I think it's fair to say that neither of you have been in these specific roles for very long, but I think, Mike, you've had quite a bit of experience of the industry. And Nicola, you've had quite a bit of experience of regulation, including in New Zealand. So if there are things coming from that you think we can learn from, I think we'd be happy to hear from you. But perhaps you can start by telling us what you think your core role is, what you've been charged with doing by government and indeed by Parliament, and whether you think there's a clarity about your role that actually means that people understand exactly what you're charged with. Who would like to start?
I'll start, thank you. And I'll start with role and then move on to the role clarity after that. So starting with the role, we're proud to be a strong, independent, credible regulator that inspires public confidence and is respected by the sector. ONR is the UK's independent nuclear regulator for safety, security and safeguards. Our mission is to protect society by securing safe nuclear operations. Our activities cover the design, construction, operation and decommissioning of nuclear facilities in the civil and defence sector. So I'll let Mike just elaborate a little, then come back to clarity of role.
Okay, thanks, Nikki. So as the regulator, we have many powers given to us via the various legislation, regulations. We operate in a goal-setting regime, very much outcome-focused, and we take an enabling approach to our regulation. The goal-setting regime is fairly unique across. It's not completely unique, but it is. Most regulatory bodies around the globe actually offer a prescriptive regime. We work with a goal-setting regime. And I think this is really important, actually, because it offers a number of benefits. It offers benefits to the duty holders, because they are free to make choices about how they meet the various regulations. It's not prescriptive. But for us as a regulator, we can absolutely take this enabling approach, and we do work to essentially really drive continuous improvement as well. I think another really key aspect about the framework that we operate in, I think it lends itself very well to innovation and technology advancements. So it does have a number of benefits towards it.
In terms of clarity of role, yes, our role is to protect society by securing safe nuclear operations, and in general our powers are generally adequate. Although we are working with the government, DWP and DESNZ, on how our powers will need to evolve as the industry changes. As you know, there's a significant growth in the industry. For example, in terms of powers relating to security. Steer from the government on its strategic objectives would be helpful, particularly with regards to us building future capability for an expanding sector and in terms of prioritising our work.
Well, I think we'll come on to some of those specifics later on, but obviously the government's broader policy framework is important to everybody and somewhat controversial. Do you feel free from all of that controversy? Do you think you can operate as a regulator regardless of the kind of backdrop that is there?
Yes, pretty much. We are an independent regulator, so our decision making is independent. I think that is well respected by government. We haven't felt that to be under pressure. I know it has been in other jurisdictions other than the UK, and we're very grateful for that. Any comment?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned that we are an enabling regulator, and that means we do work very hard and constructively with both licensees and also government in order to understand what the priorities, objectives are. But that, I don't think that, well, it doesn't compromise our independence in terms of regulatory decision making, and I think the duty holders and government understand that that is very much a red line, and actually we do have a very healthy relationship with licensees and with government as well, but that red line absolutely exists, and it's the independence with regard to our regulatory decision making that is absolutely paramount.
Okay, we'll follow up on some of those items. Lord Lister.
Thank you very much. I want to ask you about safety issues. In a sort of two-part question, really. What are the most significant safety issues facing you with the nuclear sites? How are these managed by the operators and other authorities? And then the second part, is cyber security now as big an issue as physical security? And I welcome your comments on that.
So, ONR oversees the entire life cycle of nuclear facilities, from design and construction through operation, decommissioning, and eventually site closure. The hazards across the life cycle can be very different, but perhaps two that are common that might challenge nuclear safety and security are ageing infrastructure and capability. Mike?
Yeah, so I mean, Nikki's right here. I think there is a wide variety because of the size of the life cycle, wide variety of hazards and risks that we regulate against. We've highlighted these two. Ageing, it is an issue across the sector. And for example, recently we have permissioned some ageing docks at Devonport Dockyard to accommodate submarine maintenance. And that was quite a challenging exercise in order to liaise with the licensee to bring those particular facilities up to appropriate standards. But I think probably the example that maybe a lot of people are familiar with is Sellafield. And Sellafield particularly has a number of ageing facilities. It has got some particularly hazardous facilities, notably legacy ponds and silos. To do nothing is not acceptable. Because the facilities are ageing, the risk is continually going up. And so we've engaged very closely with the NDA, with Sellafield, the licensee, and governments. We've used the process as part of our enabling process called the G6, which I can elaborate further on as we go through. But this has really helped us to influence NDA and Sellafield to address the hazards in those particular facilities, which they are making strides to do so. But this is a very long process. The other side of the other kind of, I think, common area of risk is capability, and I think this is absolutely the case that industry has issues with regard to its expertise. We have an ageing workforce in many cases, and industry is struggling to replace that expertise. And in fact, we have seen examples in recent years where some of the decision making has not necessarily been optimal, which has resulted in near misses and sometimes events. And you can actually identify this as a common thread of expertise of the workforce. Either they haven't had sufficient training or not sufficiently experienced in the processes, etc. So I think those two are two kind of common issues. But as I said, there is a spectrum of risks across the sector. In terms of cybersecurity, the real thing about cybersecurity is, well, the thing about any nuclear risk is the consequences and whether there is the potential to lead to a radioactive release. For cybersecurity, we are giving this an awful lot of attention. Now, in fact, it was one of the previous Chief Nuclear Inspector's themes, because we needed to work with industry, because this is a development developing field to ensure that they have appropriate controls over cybersecurity. However, at this point, I don't believe there is a situation where a cybersecurity event could lead to a radioactive release. This is because most of the industry have hardwired engineered controls in place. So, for example, if you take the reactor fleet, if there was a cybersecurity attack, it would influence some of the systems, etc. But the last line of defence are the control rods would drop into the core, and these are mechanical, they are hardwired, and it would shut the core down to prevent any radioactive release. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean that we're complacent. We absolutely need to understand how technology could evolve. Maybe the use of artificial intelligence could come into the nuclear sector and be used more prevalently. And so we have to be absolutely tuned to what the risks are. And the licensees themselves have to really understand exactly what the risks are with this.
I just wanted to jump in and ask a quick safety and environmental issues, because I think you share responsibility with the Environment Agency. How does that work, particularly with regard to Sellafield?
Yes, the Environment Agency has its own VIREs, and they inspect things like discharges to ground and to the water, etc. The Environment Agency, I mentioned the G6 approach. Maybe it might be worth just me elaborating a little bit on this at this stage, because this was an approach that was developed by us as ONR, as the chief regulator, but we worked with the Environment Agency, we worked with government in the space of DEC, as it was at the time, and UK investment projects, and with the licensee, which was Sellafield and NDA. And we worked together to take a collaborative approach, because specifically aimed at the legacy plants on site, because, as I said earlier, to do nothing wasn't an option. But we felt that Sellafield wasn't making sufficient progress in taking this forward. So we identified a common purpose, which was accelerated risk and hazard reduction at the Sellafield site, and all partners worked very closely together to regulate in a proportionate way, in a way that looked for fit-for-purpose solutions and looked to drive, actually focus where the biggest risk and business hazard was. And I think this just illustrates the way in which we work with the Environment Agency. We do work very closely with them. They have separate regulations, but they don't compromise each other or conflict with each other. But we do have a strong working relationship, particularly at ground level, in terms of actually how we regulate the hazards.
Now, while we're on Sellafield, I think Viscount Thurso would like to come in at this stage online.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning to you both. I really wanted to follow up a bit on the safety issues. I mean, you said in your answer to Lord Udney Lister that there was some not optimal decision-making, which I think is probably one of the greatest understatements of all time. And you put it down mostly to experience, people not having the experience or the knowledge. But we've heard some fairly compelling reports, and there's been a number of articles and other reports suggesting that, particularly at Sellafield, there is a cultural problem, and it is the old culture. And I should say that I am speaking to you 7 miles from Dounreay on the north coast of Scotland, which I know well, and I know the problems they've had, and I know what they've done to address them. But to what extent do you think there is a cultural issue, and particularly at Sellafield?
So I'll start, and Mike can add anything if he feels the need. Sellafield, as you know, is a high hazard site with complex challenges. And ONR has ongoing interventions in place to scrutinise both leadership and culture there. And we've also investigated some whistleblowing concerns and also media articles. We have found no evidence that issues such as racism, bullying or harassment have directly or indirectly impacted safety or security on the site. We continue to monitor the situation. and we continue to emphasise the need for a positive culture. I have to say, we do not intervene in issues, employment issues, which are rightfully Sellafield's and not ours.
Can I just ask you to amplify on that? Because by cultural problems, I don't think we're talking about racism, sexism and bullying or anything else. Here, at Dounreay, for example, about 7, 8, 9 years ago, we had a problem when the operator left the lids on the drums when he was filling them with cementation. The net result was that what should have been going into the drums actually poured onto the floor. And the reason behind that, it was discovered, was familiarity with the system, that he'd been there so long that when a red light showed that said it was the door wasn't, whatever it was not operating, he ignored it because he thought he knew better. So by culture, I'm not talking about employment culture. I am talking about the we know best, we've been here for 30 years, we know how it's built, so I'll do it my way culture. That's the issue I wondered if I'd ask you to address.
I think Mike will amplify in a moment, but I have to emphasise, though, we have investigated a number of issues. We talk constantly to Sellafield about their culture and emphasise to them the need for a good culture throughout their organisation. But I do emphasise that we have investigated any concerns that have been raised with us, and we have found no evidence that they would directly or indirectly impact safety or security. Mike?
Yeah, a very strong aspect of our regulatory framework is not just the fact that it's goal setting, but it's also the relationship that we have with the licensees. Because we do have inspectors who are attached to a particular licensed site, and they spend a number of days, a number of weeks during the year engaging with the licensee to build up this relationship, but also they're the eyes and ears on the site as well. And so we don't just speak to operators, we also speak to the leadership chain, but also people like safety reps as well. And the cultural aspect is a very key part of what we look at. It's part of the license conditions. It's about the organisations having suitably qualified, experienced personnel. But also we look at that softer side as well, to actually understand what the safety culture is for a particular licensee. I hinted at, or I mentioned earlier about the suboptimal decision making, and this is, as I said, this is what we see when we do see incidents like this. We then inspect further. We will look deeper in this. Actually, get the licensee to tell us exactly for it to do its own investigation as to what's happened. Ready to report the findings to us. If we need to take further action in the form of either softer enforcement action or even greater enforcement, we will do so, and that's all part of our holding industry to account. So I believe that we do take culture, safety culture in particularly, very seriously on the sites, and it is a key part of our interventions and a part of our regulation to ensure that not just systems, engineered systems, are fit for purpose and adequate for nuclear safety, but also the cultural aspects as well.
You have had whistleblowers who have expressed some very significant concerns about the casual nature of some of the aspects. So in those circumstances, are you saying you go to Sellafield and say, tell us your side of the story, and then accept what they're saying?
I wouldn't necessarily say accept what they're saying, but it's we would look for the evidence. If we felt there was something wrong, we would speak to various people depending on the situation, and would actually do if it was a serious event that was being reported, we would take this very seriously. We do our own investigation, and if there was more to follow up on, we will follow up on this and hold the duty holder to account. I have to admit, on many whistleblowing cases, there is no further action to be taken. But if there is, we can do that.
It might be somebody reporting an attitude rather than a serious event, and it's quite difficult to investigate attitudes.
It is, and I think this is where the relationship that we have with the duty holders is really important, because we can either go to the individuals themselves, the teams they're involved with. Safety reps are a very good source of information, so we do have a very good relationship with the unions and with the safety representatives on site as well, but then also the leadership and the management. And it is after all, it is the responsibility of the licensees they are responsible for nuclear safety and security on the site as well. So it is down to them to actually articulate to us why they believe that the situation is safe. Be it from, as I said, if it is a cultural issue, they have to demonstrate that, look, actually they do have the right people with the right attitudes and the right safety culture on site.
Okay, Versa.
Just to follow up on that, can you explain why Sellafield was taken out of special measures for its physical safety in February, despite the ONR giving the site improvement notices in the month before and in the month after? Are you satisfied that the physical safety risks are properly managed at the site, and how do you monitor that?
Yeah, so the situation at Sellafield is quite complex in terms of our attention levels. What we do is we have our normal attention level for a site is routine attention, and this means that the site, for either of our purposes, either for nuclear safety or nuclear security, they will have a routine level of inspection. For nuclear security, and this is physical security, we raised the attention level to enhanced, because we had some specific concerns regarding leadership, regarding the qualification of personnel on site, and also one of the facilities, the main control facility, the command facility, which we expected to be brought into operational status, but they were very slow to do so. So we gave them an enhanced attention for this. We had a number of interventions at Sellafield. This culminated in their annual security exercise, which was November 2024, at which we were satisfied that actually that they had accommodated all of the improvements necessary. We followed this up with a further robust inspection, and we were satisfied after that for physical security, they could come back down to routine attention. That doesn't mean, because it's routine attention, that doesn't mean we can still issue improvement notices if we think that it's the appropriate action to take. And we do this with lots of sites if they are at routine attention, but that doesn't necessarily mean we would elevate it.
Can I just check on that? Are we talking then about the CNC and that level of security, physical security?
That's right, it's physical security. Yes, that's right. Just to clarify as well, cyber security at Sellafield is in significantly enhanced attention, as is nuclear safety for the legacy ponds and silos, whereas normal safety across the site is at enhanced attention. So there are various levels that we choose for Sellafield.
Just one final quick question. Would it be fair to say that, like Dounreay, Sellafield, both Dounreay and Sellafield were experimental sites where the immediate post-war attitude was, get the job done, find a way through, solve the problem, and that, most of our other sites are operational sites where it was build it according to the design and operate it, and that some of the legacy cultural issues come from that, let's get the job done because we need to find this out, rather more than the just operate it safely. Would you say there's a truth in that?
I would say there was an element of truth going back in the day. I think now that the industry has moved on to an extent that now the management for the site, for both of those sites, understand what is required of a modern site, and they meet the regulations appropriately.
Thank you.
Ernest Valentine.
Thank you. I've got two questions, but maybe I just reflection on that. I'm just listening to this conversation about culture, and I have an impression of a place where local people are recruited for jobs, and there's a sort of sense of man and boy you stay in the same job. If that's so, normally there would be the sort of cultural issues that we think there are at Sellafield. And I'm just trying to hear how you're dealing with that, whether people get removed from jobs if they've actually spilt something they shouldn't have spilt, or anything like that.
Yeah, there is an element of that, obviously, because you look at where the nuclear sites are around the country, and there are very much communities that are employed at particular sites, and they have been for decades. Again, I will repeat that it's the licensees who are responsible for safety, and they have to assure themselves that they have the right level of safety culture. They understand what the regulations. What is required of the regulations, etc., and they do take people to task, and they do hold people to account if they do have this attitude which isn't conducive with nuclear safety. And similarly, if we're on site and we see things, we will either report it to the management to influence in this way, or we have the opportunity to take firmer enforcement action.
So can I just make a comment there? I think the culture of an organisation goes hand in glove with the leadership of that organisation. And we do work very strongly with the Sellafield and NDA in order to try to improve the leadership and to try to ensure that they are doing their part in terms of holding people to account and so forth. That has been a bit of a struggle, but I think we have seen quite a lot of improvements.
Let me ask the questions I'm supposed to ask. I'm actually asking two together. If you don't mind, I will ask the two together because they're both connected to funding, and so it'll be slightly long. But to what extent are safety concerns at nuclear sites caused by the level of public funding provided to the NDA? How involved are you in funding discussions on those issues with ministers in the Department for Energy Security, Net Zero and Treasury? And then the second question is, does the Office for Nuclear Regulation have the resources it needs to effectively oversee nuclear sites and operators more generally? If not, should nuclear companies be willing to pay increased fees in order to improve the regulator's capacity? Or would there be a need to provide greater public funding?
We start with NDA.
Yes, and do ask me to repeat if I know it's a long question.
So starting with the funding of NDA, ONR is not involved in funding decisions with government for NDA. We're not an economic regulator, and funding decisions are outside of our statutory functions. However, we are involved in discussions with both NDA and DESNES and government on priorities, particularly at Sellafield and in other areas, and we are clear that the risks at Sellafield are intolerable. It's very important that there is adequate long-term funding for NDA, and it's essential in terms of bringing that risk down. And if there was any additional funding available, we would be supportive of that if it to the extent that it was able to help to reduce that risk over time, and we would work with NDA and Sellafield in order to do that. Anything you want to add?
I will. Thanks, Nikki. I mean, funding is it's quite a complex issue, I guess. As Nikki said, the funding. It's really important that the funding at Sellafield does have that longevity, because the facilities that Nikki mentioned that are intolerable, the legacy ponds and silos, the risks there will last for many decades. So it's important that they have sufficient funding. Sometimes funding can, as part of the G6 that I mentioned, though, one of the approaches that we took that really helped to accelerate the risk and hazard reduction was to encourage Sellafield and NDA to develop fit-for-purpose solutions. This was because they had some of the engineering equipment, which was, I mean, from an engineering point of view, fantastic, but highly complex. which meant that it had to undergo regular maintenance, and so was often out of action. And so this is a situation where sometimes if the funding isn't directed towards at the right level and the right activity, it can have a disruptive effect. And in fact, at Sellafield, when you're decommissioning some plants, often the kind of simple, less complex solutions are the best. That's where we look for fit-for-purpose solutions. And in fact, actually, this is where the innovation itself lends itself to to this. We encourage Sellafield to be innovative, to actually look for different solutions that would end up with positive outcomes, rather than just developing highly complex engineered solutions, which may not necessarily always be the best option.
So moving on to resources, I think that ONR feels that it has adequate resources at this time. That's not to say that we have an easy job. We don't, and it requires prioritisation and it requires us to work smartly and to try to be as efficient as we possibly can in order to minimise the resource that we need. I would say, though, that the sector is growing. The nuclear workforce is expected to grow from 80,000 people in 2024 to 120,000 by 2030, driven by new civil and defence programmes. So we are attracting and retaining specialist staff is a challenge, and we expect that to be an increasing challenge, particularly in a highly competitive market. Where there will be increased demand across the sector. I think from that perspective, getting a true understanding of how the sector is likely to change in the future, how it's going to expand, and what the government's ambitions are, is actually quite important to us so that we can plan. Did you want me to go on to anything to add to that?
No.
Did you want me to go on to funding, which was another aspect of that?
Sure.
We recover our costs from the industry we regulate and from government departments to whom we provide a service. We are currently reviewing our funding model, and we're working with DWP, our sponsoring department, to develop a more appropriate model for our needs. We don't think it is quite right. For example, funding the development of future capability can be difficult. We can't pass those costs onto the industry, and we need separate funding for that. So we are looking at what the options are and working very constructively with DWP on that. We don't have an answer for that at this stage. I should also say we do acknowledge the need to be efficient, and as you commented at the beginning, both Mike and I are relatively new to our roles, and it's something that we need to. We will be looking at how we can make the organisation be more efficient. I think some of the easy wins have already been taken, and it will be perhaps more difficult things that may require some investment that can help the organisation to be more efficient. But we think there are things that can be done there.
Anything you want to add? Or?
No, the technology is obviously one area that we could look at. Artificial intelligence, to see how we can potentially use that, and for our benefits.
I think Lord Gilbert wants to come in on this.
Specifically on artificial intelligence, if I can.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think the impression we've got over a number of inquiries is the public sector is way behind the private sector on the imaginative way in which it thinks about using artificial intelligence to improve efficiency, cut costs, increase productivity. First of all, is that a fair impression generally across the public sector? And Dr. Crauford, you may have a point of view given your wider experience. And if so, how do we get a real step change? It's not just about you. How do we get a step change across the public sector, across bodies like yours, so that this opportunity is seized and it's not just seen as a threat?
Yeah, I think one of the issues across nuclear is probably its risk aversion. I think it may be a legacy product, but there's an attachment to nuclear that somehow nuclear is, well, it's inherently risky, and so I think this does develop this kind of natural risk aversion across the sector. It's one of the things that we, again, looking at the G6 approach at Sellafield, is one of the things that really try to break down, actually to accept or to acknowledge that sometimes there may be a short-term increase in risk for long-term gains. Now, I think this is something that Nikki and I have talked about the organisation, about our organisation, is about actually looking at how we can, in certain areas, be less risk averse and really adopt some of these technology innovations like artificial intelligence, but other areas as well, to see how we can use them for the benefit. And it's something that we're talking to industry about as well, for them to do the same. We have developed a sandbox approach where we've gone to the industry and said, look, you can trial things, just tell us exactly what's on your mind. Sometimes I think the industry has been a little bit reluctant to share things with the regulators because they feel as though if they come up with an idea, we'll say, no, actually, no, that won't fly, and we'll somehow hold them to account for this. So we've approached this by having sandbox approaches where they have a safe space where they can test new ideas, and we are seeing this coming through. Them testing new ideas that we can do it, that they can do in a safe space. But I agree, there's more to do, and I think it's one of the things that we are really looking forward to as part of our next strategy, is to really encourage both the industry and ourselves to be less risk averse in certain areas, to really drive this technology for greater benefit.
I think we're all wanting to follow up maybe on the same point. I mean, do you understand why the public might not like the idea of you becoming less risk averse? I mean, you've talked about some of the issues about skills, you've talked about the difficulties that Sellafield have had, and you've talked about some of the decommissioning problems. So when the innocent abroad, such as some of us, hear you say the phrase risk averse, we're too risk averse, the general public might have concerns about that. I agree, and this is why, again, we have. It's really important that we explain to stakeholders, particularly the public, how we operate, that we do have sufficient checks and balances in place, that we do have a robust regulatory regime, and areas where there are significant risks, we will encourage and ensure that the licensee does put appropriate controls in place. But that should not be a blanket over the whole industry. And I think this is one of the things that is kind of driving that culture, is sometimes it's associated that because it's nuclear, it's something special, and there has to be this gold standard across everything that nuclear does, and that's not the case. And so I think we can certainly play our part in this, in really influencing the industry itself to identify where those areas are where it can actually be less risk averse, but also explain to the government, to the public, exactly our approach, and to give them reassurance that the estate is still safe. Hey, Backup Chandler, you wanted to come in?
No,
I just wanted to follow up actually on the earlier conversation. It's a very quick thing which may be a long answer to, but DWP is your sponsoring department, and I was surprised by that. Is that logical?
I think the reason for it is probably partly historical. Originally, ONR was part of HSE, and we were split off from HSE. HSE obviously part of DWP. I think the other reason is to separate the policy arm from the sponsoring department, and in that way ensure independence of the regulatory body. And so DWP is not responsible for any activities in the nuclear sector. DESNES is, and and could potentially influence the regulator, and so hence the separation.
The processes are sufficiently smooth and responsive to meet what we hope will be the government's ambitions. And the government's getting slightly more positive about nuclear than it was, but still some of us think there's a lot further to go. Do you think the processes are going to work for a much bigger amount of nuclear generation, a bigger nuclear industry? And do you need improvements to the process, particularly to enable new types of reactors, including SMRs, AMRs, which will of course mean licensing potentially hundreds of sites across the country? Can nevertheless delays and costs be reduced without compromising on safety?
Actually, the UK's regulatory system is recognised internationally as being one of the most flexible in the world, as well as actually one of the quickest as well. And we work hard to ensure that ONR is not on the critical path to any decision making for new nuclear, and we engage with the industry at an early stage. However, we are hampered on occasions by the maturity of new entrants' design. That is critical to how quickly we can operate. I'll get Mike to explain the GDA process, because actually we feel as though it has saved new entrants a significant amount of money and is actually a very quick process.
Thanks, Nikki. Yeah, the GDA process, it was designed essentially to de-risk projects. So it is for prospective developers to come to the regulator so that we can do an assessment of the particular design to ensure that it is, or it does have the potential to be built in Great Britain before the really expensive part is undertaken, i.e. civil build. Because once you actually, from a reactor point of view, or a reactor developer's point of view, once you're into civil build, and if there are issues with the design at that stage, that is hugely expensive and very costly. So the idea for the GDA process is to actually identify the design, identify any showstoppers or any issues with the design that would prevent construction in the UK. As Nikki said, the issue that we have seen with some of the GDAs is that the design is either not mature enough, so that once it goes through the design, the GDA process, and it has an acceptance certificate, the design that is subsequently built doesn't quite reflect the design that goes through the process, and that can be really expensive. The other thing that we've seen during GDA processes is that the submissions, the safety case submissions that come to ONR are not sufficient, and so there's a rework to be done there as well. Nevertheless, despite all of this, we have actually shortened the GDA process. We have made it more efficient, and by having early engagement with prospective licensees, prospective developers, we can actually ensure that they understand exactly what's required from the GDA process so that they can have a much stronger submission when they come to the process. Just to pick up on a final thing about the SMRs and AMRs, or SMRs, you mentioned that it could be the situation that there will be hundreds of SMRs. The GDA process was designed exactly for that. So you essentially design, if a developer wanted to go down that route, and you would expect that they would try replication as much as possible. Right. Mm-hmm. So the design that comes through the process is has the maturity and the stability that it can replicate many of these designs, then we will only need to do it once. There will be site-specific aspects, so depending on where the actual SMR is located, but the main bulk of the assessment would have been done up front, and so actually it lends itself really, really well to that fleet approach.
Okay. Thank you. I have two supplementaries, I'm afraid, if that's all right. The first one is, assuming a substantial increase in new nuclear projects, do you have the resources and the staff to provide approvals in a timely way? Would the ONR, for example, be able to handle 3 or 4 GDA applications at the same time? without leading to significant delays and competition for resources?
I think we have already managed 3 or 4, that would be my understanding, GDAs at one time. However, to answer your broader question, no, we don't have the resources, and we would need to resource up, and it is a question of how we do that in an as efficient way as possible, and as I've already said, attracting and retaining specialists in the sector can be difficult, particularly when the rest of the sector is gearing up as well.
Thank you. And can I ask a second supplementary, which is related to the AWE and the submarine programme, which I know both of them fall under defence regulations, but nevertheless I think you provide considerable assistance to those programmes. And will the expansion of those defence programmes, which is happening and is going to happen more, have an adverse effect on the number of nuclear regulators available for the whole of the UK's nuclear industry?
So you are correct. So the AWE is a licensed site, so it comes under our remit. There are aspects of the design of the components that is the defence regulator, but it's predominantly the site is to us. And the nuclear submarine programme, we regulate Barrow, the build Barrow, the core manufacturer at Rolls-Royce, and some of the dockyards as well at Devonport. So you're right. The defence sector is a large sector that we regulate. It's one of the reasons why we have to have, when we talked about engaging with government, so it's not just DESNZ, but also the Ministry of Defence as well, to really understand exactly what their programmes look like, what their objectives are, so that we can actually prioritise our work. And sometimes it's not just focused on DESNZ; it is a balance of how we regulate the defence sector as well. So far, we've done, by our prioritisation, by using the efficiencies that we've identified, we have been able to regulate that sector effectively. But it will be challenging as both of these sides of the industry are expanding. Thank you.
Well, Gilbert.
I wanted to come on, if I can, to staffing. How easy do you find it to recruit staff, specialist staff in particular, particularly in the area of cyber security, data presumably, which is another area that's important to you, and an area of high demand, and other digital skills?
It's not easy. We find it difficult. It's a very competitive market. We have around about 18 inspectors on cyber security, and at the moment that's adequate, but I suspect that is not going to be in the future. So we find it difficult to attract and retain staff, both particularly specialist staff, both nuclear and non-nuclear. It can be difficult. We are competing against other areas in the sector which traditionally pay more. So it can be difficult.
Presumably with other sectors too. Some of the skills you require are not sector specific. Presumably some of the data and technical skills apply across other commercial employers.
That's correct.
Is there any merit or scope for much greater cooperation between regulators in developing really substantial pools of talent, rather than each regulator hiring? Now, obviously, in the specific nuclear field, then you would hire. But I'm thinking more in a range of digital and other technical roles. Now, I know this. For example, I think some of the digital regulators cooperate together. But is there scope? You may wish to address of expertise that is available then to all of its component members.
We work with the sector, with the nuclear sector as a whole, in terms of what our regulatory requirements are going to be, or what the sector requirements are going to be, and so we do plan together with them, and the different elements of the nuclear sector do work quite cooperatively together just on that recruitment. we do some work with HSE on this, don't we? Perhaps you can.
Yeah, I think in answer to your question, yes. I think that I talked about the goal-setting framework that we have in the UK, but other sectors, the Office of Rail use the same approach. CBA, the aircraft regulator, uses the same approach as well, and so they have specific regulatory skills. And as you said, when you talk about things like management arrangements and data and things like this, there are commonalities. So I think there are, and in fact we have taken individuals from other sectors, as you said, not with a deep specialist nuclear knowledge, but with a broader skill set. We have taken them and they have been very effective regulators. So I think there is scope to look potentially more widely at this as to how there might be either a sharing of resource, I'm not sure, but certainly using some of the same skill sets, because I think it is appropriate.
I think some of those other regulators are actually concerned that we might take some of their staff. That's a part of the problem with trying to make
that's an indication of the tightness of the market. Is you're competing not just with commercial with businesses, you're competing with other regulators. It just seems to me that perhaps really something much more ambitious ought to be done about finding some really strong centre of expertise, which becomes a really attractive place for people to work, may be able to afford higher salaries if you all cooperated, and then you were all able to draw on this higher level of expertise rather than be competing with each other. Now, I'm not talking about the nuclear-specific skills. Data is people who are... which is partly what I was trying to get at with the question about AI, which is not... I'm not suggesting that you insert AI into your safety critical functions and create some sort of nightmare, but that all organisations could improve the way that they operate by more forward-looking and a less risk-averse use to AI in their organisation. And I just wonder whether these are something that you ought to be looking at with other regulators.
Yes, yeah. I mean, you mentioned AI. I mean, safety case production, for example, is one area that some licensees are actually actively looking at and having some success. So we might have a situation where you have a safety case produced by AI, assessed by AI, whether that's too far, but there's it will obviously need to be lots of checks and balances in place. But there is plenty of scope, I think. And as you said, that doesn't necessarily need to have, in terms of the production of safety cases or the assessment of safety cases, doesn't need to have specific nuclear skills.
Well, if you can do what if the private sector is doing, is sort of reduce its operating costs, not its core, your core costs, but your operating costs by seeing from then you can invest more into the kind of expertise that you need of these really sort of serious expert people to deal with the safety critical roles. The other side of that, of course, in any industry regulatory relationship is the revolving door. Revolving doors can be a positive thing. You get people who work in the industry, they understand the industry, the industry then understands where you're coming from. Can be a negative, which is the relationship isn't quite right. In your experience, is it okay in your industry?
Generally, I think it is quite positive. A number of our inspectors, for example, have transferred from HSE, just because of the point that Mike raised, that there is quite a lot of similarity in terms of our approach. Nevertheless, though, the revolving door can be a bit of a problem. Mike spoke earlier about having the experience and the knowledge required to be an inspector in the type of regulatory regime that we're under, which does require quite a lot of discretion, and together with that, quite a lot of expertise. And too much of a revolving door means that you're constantly training new people up, and they're not getting the seniority and the expertise that you require in order to do the type of regulation we have. So it is a bit of a balance.
The other thing, if I could just add to that as well, is in terms of, again, a potential worry bead is regulatory capture. if you have people from industry come to us, we have very strong, robust protections in place, in terms of our decision making, in terms of where we actually put individuals, once they come from a particular licensee, they wouldn't regulate that licensee for a number of years, and those types of things.
It was regulatory capture I was thinking about,
yes.
and you're confident that...
Yeah, that's not the case.
Sorry, may I just come in with a very quick question? Civil service pay scales for your technical staff, how much of that is a barrier, and are you able to manoeuvre around it?
We have to take the civil service pay scales into account, but we are not restricted to them entirely, but we do need to take them into account. So it doesn't give us a free-for-all, but it does help a little. It is still a constraint, I would say.
Lord Best.
My question is about your cooperation with other established nuclear nations, in particular in relation to approving reactor designs. The UK's generic design assessment seems to be well respected internationally, but are there other ways in which one could pool expertise and reduce the time and cost of the UK approvals processes?
We work hard on international collaboration with other regulators. We have already created more efficient, harmonised approaches to reactor design assessment, benefiting both the industry and global nuclear safety. We make use of assessments carried out by other national regulators where possible. But every country has its own legal framework and standards, and that will always act as a barrier to full global harmonisation.
No, thanks, Nikki. And that's absolutely the case. So it's one of the reasons why the International Atomic Energy Agency has developed a project. It's called NESI, which stands for Nuclear Harmonisation and Standardisation Initiative. And this is designed to drive both the industry and the regulators to develop a more harmonised approach. As Nikki said, there are individual states do have their own regulations, their own regulatory framework. But nevertheless, the agency does believe that, and I'm absolutely aligned to this, that there are large parts of a safety assessment, whether it's done by the French regulator, the US regulator, the Canadian regulator, the UK regulator, that essentially will meet the same standard. And so I think that's something that NESI is really trying to exploit. On a more kind of parochial basis, there are benefits, I think, as well, in also using bilateral and trilateral arrangements with, and we've done the same with the US and the Canadians in terms of one particular design, where we are actually sharing information and sharing assessments, so that we can actually give a much more efficient approval process, and a much more efficient in terms of the assessment needed. But also as well, it will enhance deployment, so that if 3 sovereign regulators have assessed the same design, that actually can lead to the deployment in different countries much more readily. So these are things that we're really starting to look at. Before I did this job just 3 weeks ago, I was actually at the agency for 16 months, and this is one of the projects that the agency is really driving hard to developing, working with sovereign regulators. And so now I'm in this place, into this position, I can actually drive things from ONR side of things to ensure that we do have much greater collaboration, either bilaterally or trilaterally with states who are looking at specific designs, or on this wider process to make things much more effective and much more efficient.
Have you picked up on any particular change that you'd like to see in the UK from your international experience? If only we did it like somebody else. Are there any real lessons?
Not specific examples, but however, what I would say is that I think the UK approach really lends itself to this kind of type of collaboration because it's goal setting. Sometimes, there are other sovereign regulators who are very prescriptive, and there are some real points of detail that remain really quite sticking points. But the UK system doesn't have that approach because we're goal setting, and it's down to the licensees, to the developers, as to how they meet the legal requirements. So it's much more flexible, so it does lend itself to that approach.
Good to know.
You've got to have real confidence in whoever is signing off in another jurisdiction.
You do, and this is where our relationship with with other regulators, and we do have a community of sovereign regulators that we hold in high esteem. Like the French regulator, like the US NRC, like the Canadian regulator. They are well trusted, highly expertise, and so we would have, I think there is a high level of confidence there in sharing such assessments.
If something was signed off in the US or Canada or those other countries, you would almost automatically accept it?
Not necessarily automatically. We would need to engage to see how they have done their approach. But I think there is there's a strong chance that actually we can find some work together to have some real collaboration, which we are beginning to see.
Tevison.
Yes, I want to explore your relationship with other organisations like devolved authorities, government and regulators. But first of all, I just want to take you up on a point that both of you have made, that you are new to your jobs, right? Mm-hmm. And when you start a new job, you sort of have a thing in your mind, that's how I want to make it my own, that's what I want to change. So what I'd be interested to understand is, from both of you, your top 3 things that you've decided you want to make your mark on, just as bullet points, not as a long explanation. Now you've got these appointments. Can I start with Nicola?
Sure. It's my view that I think greater efficiencies would be one of mine. What I observe in ONR is that it's very good at doing the regulatory decisions. It's very well respected throughout the sector. And I think there are some business disciplines that perhaps need improvement, and that would be a focus of mine. And I think by integrating the good regulatory work with better business efficiencies, then I think we can get some greater efficiencies across the organisation. Another area that I would want to see an improvement is in our relationship with the government departments, Ministry of Defence, DESNES and DWP. I don't think it's bad. I think that I think it could be better. For example, as a regulator, we see across the entire sector. We are the only party who sees across the entire sector. I think we could be engaging with government at a much more strategic level rather than on a transactional level as we do at the moment. Mike.
Thanks. We do regulate the industry effectively, but given the challenges that have been discussed today, I would like to see us being more productive, my first bullet point. I would like to see us being even more enabling, as my second bullet point, and I think that the third thing is to be more identifying of fit-for-purpose solutions.
Okay, thanks. That's very useful.
I would add actually a third, and that is that I think we need to do more on the point that's already been raised on workforce planning. There's much more we can do on that. We need to be better at that.
Okay, thank you very much for that. That's useful. In terms of your work with devolved administrations, environmental regulators, I mean, there are many of those. I used to be a board member of the Marine Management Organisation that gets upset about warming waters outside the nuclear power stations, and particularly the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, the NDA, where it seems maybe if you looked at it, you think, why are there 2 regulators rather than one in that area? So how do you work with those other organisations and devolved authorities, local authorities?
So we work very hard to work collaboratively, particularly with other UK regulators, and we learn from each other, and we share good practice. One example that Mike gave earlier is the G6, and we've adopted that same approach in other sites other than Sellafield. It's a priority for us to build stronger collaboration and to improve efficiencies and so forth. And we have a number of agreements with MOUs to clarify our role and also to coordinate activities. And indeed, I meet personally with the chairs of a number of different organisations. With regards to NDA, they're not a regulator. They own the decommissioning sites, but they're not the regulator. We work very closely with them, and again, we have a very strong relationship both with the NDA, with its subsidiaries, and also each individual duty holder and licensee. We work collaboratively, providing policy and strategic advice as well as in terms of our regulatory frameworks.
Yeah, no, I would just add. I think the NDA is vitally important. I think for the sector in terms of how it drives forward decommissioning at Sellafield and at Dounreay and across the estate. So it has a really important role. In terms of other regulators, we do work well with other regulators. We mentioned earlier about the Environment Agency. There may be scope for looking at some of the resources. So, for example, with the Environment Agency, as part of its remit, it looks at disposal of waste. We look at storage of waste. You could argue that actually the skills are to deal with both are very similar, and so that might be an area. Things like this, there may be an area of, in terms, particularly where there are skill shortages, that of somehow pooling the resources we talked to, or making best use of the skills available, I think.
So, working with, say, in Wales, do they have the resources, the devolved authorities, like
like NRW, for example?
Yeah.
I believe that
we've got to be careful. There's Lord Gilbert over there from representing Wales to a degree, but do they have sufficient skills to work?
I believe they use some of the EA resource for to enable to them to discharge their duties.
Okay, Nicola, you mentioned of your three better relations with government and government departments. So tell us a little bit more about that. As the Baroness Valentine said, it seems rather strange you were there with the DWP. I can understand that with the health and safety bit in the background. But so what needs to be sorted out with government relations?
Well, I don't think it's a question of sorting it out. I think it's just a question of making sure that we do have good relations with them, that there's no surprises, and that we that we have cooperation. I mean, for example, I'm working quite closely with DWP personally at the moment on recruitment of new board members for ONR, and that's been an interesting process. We've a very cooperative one. DESNES is involved as well, but it's been led by DWP, and they have been very helpful in terms of my aspiration to raise the capability of the board. Another area that I worked with that I mentioned earlier is on the funding model, which we feel is not perhaps optimal and could be improved. And some of it, I think, is the way we have interpreted the frameworks that we work within, rather than actually being a constraint by DWP. So there again, we work more cooperatively. With DESNES, I think, as I say, I think we engage with them very well, but we do that on an issue by issue basis, and I think that we could potentially provide more of an overview as to what is required in the nuclear sector, particularly during this time of massive change.
Yeah, I can see the importance of that. Thank you. Just one other question, coming back really to security in a way. Hinkley C, a major investor in that is the China General Nuclear Power Company. Do you have any say or look over the relationship between, from a security point of view, of a Chinese investor in British nuclear power?
No, I mean, I know this was the source of discussions going back a few years, and particularly with the Bradwell, issue. But again, I think we would look at security of Hinkley Point C on its own, in its own merit, and so to demonstrate, or Hinkley Point C as a licensee would need to demonstrate that they have adequate arrangements in place to ensure that security was not an issue. And also as well, we would engage with other government departments in terms of threat identification of threats, to the country, and this all comes out as part of nuclear security plans that licensees and others would need to put in place.
Do you overlook that? You oversee it?
It's the licensee's responsibility how it sets itself up.
Who looks at that though? I mean, who ticks that box to say that the licensee's got it right?
In terms that would need to be other parts of government.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just follow up on one thing you just mentioned incidentally there, Nicola, about appointment of new board members, and you were saying there was good cooperation. Has it been timely? Because I've heard in other sectors that there have been significant delays in the appointment of board members. Are you finding that? Is that a problem, the length of waiting?
It's a long process.
Too long?
Probably.
Okay, thank you. Vikram Chandos.
The government's wish to prioritise growth and how regulators balance that. How do you see that affecting nuclear regulation? And how do you, going back to what we were talking about the sort of general public's view of the industry's safety, how do you think that will play with the public in increasing concerns that they have?
So I think that ONR has a big role to play in terms of growth, in terms of the growth in terms of the nuclear sector, but also in terms of assisting the government in terms of energy security and reaching net zero, as well as aiding in terms of its ambitions in the defence sector as well. So we play an important role. I'm sorry, I've lost track of the rest of your question.
Well, how it's both the direct impact and the indirect impact in terms of public confidence.
Look, I think I think it's really important that that we also look at the whole life cycle of the nuclear sector, and that includes not just the new nuclear build, which everyone is keen on and everyone is interested in, but that we also pay due attention to the decommissioning part, the operations, the aging reactors that we currently have, and that they're looked after appropriately, but also decommissioning, and that we try to do that decommissioning as fast and as efficiently as possible, which unfortunately does require significant funds. And I would expect that the general public would have an expectation that that is what we would be doing.
If I could just add to that, I mean, our approach as an enabling regulator, that's actually enshrined in the Regulators Code, which says that as regulators we must operate in a way that enables compliant businesses to grow. So that's enshrined in that code, and it is how we operate. I've talked at length about our enabling approach, our fit for purpose approach, and I think this is something that we really will drive forward with me as Chief Nuclear Inspector to ensure that this is adopted by licensees. The converse of this is that We also, when we see elements of this from duty holders of gold plating, where they have gone too far and actually taking, being overly cautious in terms of systems, which has an impact on other parts of the site, we will actually point this out to duty holders, and so that to try to reduce this excessive burden that duty holders have. And we've got lots of examples over the years of how we've done this. But again, for me as Chief Nuclear Inspector, it's an aspect that I'm really going to drive forward for us, that I think will enable the organisations to grow. And after all, it's this is one of the reasons why we engage with governments, to understand exactly what their objectives are, so that us as an enabling regulator can actually operate in the best way to enable those projects to come to fruition, but they're done safely, and with the safety in terms of adequate enough, they meet the regulations, not overplaying things.
Thank you. The industry may worry or allege that stuff is gold-plated. Do you think the general public does? It just a breakdown of nuclear safety, a nuclear incident, looms so large in people's minds. You could ask, do people remember Fukushima more than they remember the global financial crisis? And therefore, if you polled the public, would they say there was any such thing as gold plating?
I suspect that the public are going to want to be assurance that we are not compromising our role, that we are providing the assurance that we that the sector is safe and secure. But I think there's also an expectation on them that we do that as efficiently as possible, and that we're not a constraint. So I think it's a question of how can we play our role and be a robust regulator, but do that efficiently.
And what are you expecting to come out of the nuclear regulation task force?
We've worked very closely with them. In fact, Mike and I have got a meeting with the head of the task force this afternoon, and we provided significant evidence to the task force. We don't know what they will come out with. We await their findings, and we welcome any suggestions that they have as to how we can do our job better.
And in your interaction with the task force, did you sense to what extent growth was driving their focus?
Well, personally, I haven't met with them. You haven't either. And today will be the team has met with them, but we haven't. Certainly, they are interested in growth, but my understanding is we got the impression they were interested in the entire sector, the decommissioning and the operations as well.
I'm trying to. Do you want to come back?
Yeah, well, I was going to talk about the task force, but Lord Chandos has covered that. But just generally, is the task force looking at the public understanding of nuclear? Who is going to educate the public if we need to have nuclear facilities outside every data center, every industrial cluster? Because there are many people who think that that's the direction in which we need to go. And it seems to me there is a massive job in terms of bringing the public with us to accept that. Whereas the public think at the moment there's 10 or a dozen nuclear sites across the country. But if there's going to be one in every town, every village, how are we going to educate them to accept that? And whose responsibility is it?
Well, I can't answer the question in terms of what the task force is looking at and whether they are considering that. I don't know. in terms of acceptance of nuclear, I think we have a role. We are not we're not the only party in this regard. I think we have a role in terms of assuring the public that that future nuclear regulation is robust, and that we're not signing off on new designs that are not fit for purpose. But that's as far as our role would go.
And I should add to this point, if we do see a situation where there are nuclear reactors outside of every data center or in every town, they would need to be licensed. They would need to be positioned on a licensed site. The operator would need to be suitably qualified and responsible to actually run and understand the hazards of a nuclear site. And as a part of the, with the way when we speak to licensees, they recognise the need for this social license, to engage with the public in the vicinity, to explain what the hazards are, etc. We would absolutely have a role in this in terms of articulating why that we would grant a license, how we would regulate this licensed site. So it's it's a big endeavour. If it did transpire to go down that route.
But look at France. How does it work in France?
It's similar. They have license. They have far greater number of reactors, but they have a regulator, as I said, highly respected regulator, ASN, who will provide, who will grant the licenses, approve designs, and they will regulate in many similar ways, although it's a prescriptive regime, but they will regulate the sites in a very similar ways to which we do.
Can I just ask you what your greatest concern is in terms of your role for the future? Is it staffing? Is it skills? Is it lack of public acceptance of what you're doing? Is it funding? What would you say is the main challenge that you're actually facing?
I don't think I can put that down to a single one. I think it's all of those things. In terms of our role, I mentioned the top three things that I think that are important to us to achieve, and that's about improving the efficiency of ONR and how it operates, making it, it's a good regulator, making it a better regulator, and making sure that it can deliver to what the UK needs in terms of the nuclear sector. But all of those other things that you mentioned are also an issue to us: acceptance with the public, ensuring that it's not just new nuclear, it is also the operations that we retire old plant when it's necessary, that we deal with ageing infrastructure, but also that we deal with our waste, and we deal with the decommissioning as efficiently as possible. We have to look at the entire sector, and that's what we will continue to do.
And a similar position from my point of view. Again, this is why I highlighted the 3 bullet points that I did. It's all about, within the growing sector, and this not just the amount of work that we will have in the future, but the urgency with which we'll need to address that. My concern is to make sure, or my priorities are to make sure that we can still regulate that industry effectively so that it can remain safe and secure, but still enable the growth agenda, still enable the waste to be handled in an appropriate manner.
Right, well, thank you very much for your time today and for the points that you've raised with us. And thank you for coming so early in your occupancy of this particular role. So thank you very much indeed, and I will close this public session. Thank you. And John, you're